Thomas Walker had been searching for months, combing through countless real estate listings, walking through homes that never felt quite right. And then, nestled on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina, he found it, a stately, historic house that seemed to whisper promises of quiet evenings and a future he had long imagined, but never built. The deal had been quick, almost suspiciously so, but Tom had brushed the thought aside. For him, stepping onto the wide wraparound porch and feeling the mountain breeze was enough. This was the house he had dreamed of. He carried a bag of groceries into the spacious kitchen, setting them down on polished granite counters that gleamed under the soft afternoon light. The house smelled faintly of wood polish and old books, as though its former owners had left in a hurry but taken care to leave everything in order. Tom poured himself a glass of wine, savoring the sound as it filled the glass and toasted softly into the empty room. "To my new home," he murmured before taking his first sip. The clink of the glass against the counter echoed faintly, underscoring the silence that filled the place. It was the kind of silence Tom had always wanted, calm, unbroken his own. He had barely taken his first bite of the dinner he had laid out when he froze, fork halfway to his mouth. Footsteps. They were faint but unmistakable, coming from the second floor. At first, he thought it must be the wood settling or maybe the wind moving through the old structure. But then came another sound, the creak of floorboards, deliberate and slow. Tom put the fork down carefully, his heart thudding harder with each second. He was supposed to be alone. The realtor had assured him that the house was vacant, that the former owners had already moved overseas. Yet here was someone, or something, moving upstairs. Grabbing his phone instinctively, Tom moved toward the staircase, every step measured, his ears straining. The air grew heavier as he ascended, the sound of his own breathing too loud in the stillness. At the top, the hallway stretched dark and quiet, but one door was slightly ajar. Light seeped through the crack. Tom reached out, hesitated, then pushed it open. On the bed, half sitting against the pillows, was a woman. Her hair, dark and tangled, fell over her shoulders as she brushed it weakly with trembling fingers. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with shadows etched beneath her eyes. She looked fragile, as if the smallest movement might shatter her. She startled when she finally noticed him, her wide, feverish eyes locking on his. "Who are you?" Her voice cracked with panic as she clutched the blanket tighter around herself. "What are you doing in my house? This is my bedroom. My husband will be home any minute." Tom's breath caught. "Your house?" He took a step back, hands raised in confusion. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this is my home. I bought it. The deed is in my name." "The realtor! You're lying!" She cut him off, her voice trembling, half fury and half desperation. "Robert and I have lived here for years. He left for work, but he'll be back. You need to leave. Right now." Tom stood frozen, studying her. Every detail of her appearance, the gaunt frame, the hollowed cheeks, the way she winced as though every breath caused her pain, spoke of illness. He realized suddenly that she wasn't an intruder at all. She was sick. And yet, what was she still doing here? Why had no one told him? "I don't understand," Tom said quietly, his voice gentler now. "I signed the papers 2 weeks ago. Robert Mitchell, the man who sold me this house, he never mentioned you. He said he was moving abroad." Her head shook violently, disbelief breaking across her features. "That's not true. Robert is at work. He promised he'd take care of me." Her words tumbled over each other, her breathing turning shallow, frantic. She pressed a hand to her temple as though the pain in her head was suddenly unbearable. "You're wrong. You're lying. He wouldn't." But before she could finish, her body went limp. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed against the pillows unconscious. Tom's pulse spiked in terror. "Oh, God!" He rushed to her side, fumbling to check for a pulse in her thin wrist. It was there, weak, fluttering, but present. He cursed under his breath, pulling out his phone. "You're going to be okay. Just hang on." he whispered, though his own voice trembled. He dialed for emergency services, giving the address with clipped precision, each word heavier than the last. When the operator confirmed help was on the way, Tom dropped the phone onto the nightstand and sat heavily at the edge of the bed, torn between fear and outrage. How could this have happened? How could the man who sold him this house fail to mention his wife was still inside? Sick, abandoned, left to fend for herself. Tom glanced at the woman, her chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. Her face, though strained with pain, still carried traces of beauty. And something else too, dignity even in her frailty. As the sound of distant sirens began to rise in the night air, Tom rubbed his forehead with his palm, overwhelmed. He had thought buying this house would mark the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Instead, it had thrust him into a story he didn't yet understand, a story that already felt darker, heavier, and far more complicated than anything he could have imagined. And in that moment, staring at the unconscious woman who called herself Anna Mitchell, Tom realized one truth above all. This house carried secrets. Secrets left behind by a man who had vanished, and a woman who should have never been left here to die. Long before Thomas Walker ever stepped foot into that house in Asheville, Anna Mitchell had already lived through heartbreak that shaped her entire existence. She was only 18 when the first cracks in her world appeared, the day of what should have been a celebration. Her mother had decorated the small living room with balloons, a modest cake waiting on the table. Anna had thought it was going to be the perfect birthday, the kind where her mother would beam with pride and remind her how bright her future looked. But as the evening unfolded, the joy was cut short. Her mother, standing awkwardly with her hands clasped, cleared her throat and confessed she had met someone new, an older man from out of town, someone who promised her the kind of happiness she claimed she had never known. They were leaving together. That night, Anna had stared at her mother in disbelief, the candles flickering on the cake between them. "But what about me?" she had asked, her voice cracking with desperation. "You're grown now, Anna," her mother said, avoiding her daughter's tear-filled eyes. "You'll be fine. You have your studies. You'll build your own life." And with that, she was gone. Anna blew out the candles alone, the taste of sugar turning bitter in her mouth. From that moment, loneliness became a familiar companion. Yet she pushed forward. She excelled in her studies, earning a scholarship to a state university. The classrooms and the library became her refuge, the place where she could bury her pain in textbooks and assignments. She worked part-time jobs to cover what her scholarship didn't, living on coffee and determination. It was during these years that she met Robert Mitchell. Robert was older, successful, and carried himself with the confidence of a man who already had the world in his hands. He ran a small but growing logistics company, moving goods across the Southeast. Anna first noticed him when he gave a guest lecture in one of her business classes, his tailored suit and smooth words a sharp contrast to the scrappy college students in the audience. When he approached her afterward, asking thoughtful questions about her ambitions, she felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. Their courtship was fast, a whirlwind of dinners at restaurants she could never afford, drives in sleek cars, and bouquets of roses that made her dorm room smell like a florist shop. Robert had a way of making her believe she was special, that he had chosen her out of all the women he could have. And for a girl still nursing the wound of being left behind, that attention felt like salvation. By the time Anna graduated, Robert proposed. The wedding was elegant, funded largely by his earnings. Even her mother returned, this time with her new husband, smiling as if nothing had happened. She handed Anna a generous check as a wedding gift, insisting it was to help the couple start their life together. Anna accepted it with a stiff smile, trying to ignore the hollow ache in her chest. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe that this new life would heal the old scars. At first, it seemed to. Robert was attentive, doting in ways that made Anna feel cherished. He spoke of building a family, of traveling together, of a bright future where she would never have to want for anything. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the warmth began to cool. It started with small comments, suggestions that she didn't need to worry about finding work, that his income was more than enough for both of them. "Why struggle at some job when you could focus on our home?" he'd say with a smile. At first, Anna resisted. She had dreamed of a career of independence. But Robert's tone grew sharper with each discussion, and soon those suggestions turned into expectations. Within a year, she was no longer pursuing her ambitions, but keeping the house spotless and ensuring dinner was always ready when he came home. The walls of the house became her world, and while Robert thrived in his, she shrank in hers. Then came the illness. At first, it was headaches and fatigue that she chalked up to stress, but the episodes grew more frequent, more debilitating. After collapsing in the kitchen one morning, Robert insisted she see a doctor. The diagnosis was grim, requiring treatment that was both aggressive and extraordinarily expensive. Robert was there in the beginning, holding her hand through appointments, making promises that they would get through this together. He covered the bills, assured her that his company was doing well enough to manage the costs. For a while, Anna believed him. She believed in them. But as months turned into years, the burden of her illness became more than Robert was willing to bear. His visits to the hospital grew shorter, his patience thinner. Where once he had stroked her hair and whispered encouragement, now he sighed loudly at her weakness. "You're not even trying anymore," he snapped one night when she was too weak to finish preparing dinner. Anna's body was betraying her, and so was her husband. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a cage. The tension grew heavy, lingering in every corner, pressing down on her until she could scarcely breathe. What hurt most was not the pain of her illness, but the slow realization that the man she had trusted, the man who had once seemed like her rescuer, was drifting further and further away. The warmth had turned to coldness, the promises to silence. And though Anna still clung to the hope that Robert would return to the man she once loved, a shadow had already settled over their marriage, one that would soon reveal just how deep his betrayal ran. As Anna's illness dragged on, the strain in the Mitchell household deepened. Robert, once the attentive husband who sat through late-night hospital visits and spoke gently of recovery, had grown weary. The sound of her labored breathing, the endless medical bills, the absence of the vibrant woman he had first married, it all weighed on him. He began staying later at work, though Anna suspected that work had little to do with it. Whiskey became his constant companion. Each evening, he returned home with the sharp scent of alcohol clinging to his clothes, his words slurred, his patience non-existent. "You don't understand what this does to me," he snapped one night, his eyes bloodshot, when Anna asked why he smelled like a bar. "You think you're the only one suffering." The words pierced her, but she lacked the strength to fight back. Alone in her bedroom, Anna lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the cold realization settling in. The man she had once trusted was slipping away, not just from her, but from the vows they had made together. And then came Crystal Hayes. She was hard to miss. Fiery red hair, sharp green eyes, and a confidence that could disarm anyone in the room. A realtor by trade, she had crossed paths with Robert during a business networking event in downtown Asheville. Where Anna's frailty reminded him of burdens and obligations, Crystal embodied energy, opportunity, and escape. She laughed easily, touched his arm as though they were already close, and whispered promises of a life unchained from sorrow. Robert didn't resist. Soon, what began as flirtation grew into an affair. They met in quiet corners of restaurants, checked into hotels under false names, and whispered plans about the future. Crystal knew exactly what Robert craved: freedom, indulgence, and validation, and she knew how to use it to her advantage. One evening, after a night tangled in sheets and whispered confessions, Crystal leaned against the hotel headboard, a glass of wine in her hand. "You're wasting away in that house," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Pouring money into treatments that won't change anything." She's not going to recover, Robert. You know that. Robert clenched his jaw, guilt flickering across his face. She's my wife, he muttered, though the conviction behind the words was thin. Crystal smiled, tilting her head. Your wife who's dragging you down. Think about what you could have if you stopped chaining yourself to her. That house, worth a fortune. Sell it. We could live anywhere we want. Europe, the coast, wherever you choose. And she wouldn't even know what happened. Robert stared at her, horrified by the suggestion, yet tempted all the same. He thought of the hospital invoices stacked on his desk, the endless drain of his bank account, the life that had become a prison. Crystal's words lingered like poison. Over the following weeks, Crystal pushed harder. She coached him on how to manipulate the situation, how to convince Anna to sign papers under the guise of medical consent forms. She trusts you, Crystal reminded him with a sly smile. Use that. Tell her it's for treatment authorization. She's too weak to question it. Robert hesitated, but desperation eclipsed morality. One afternoon, he placed the stack of papers in front of Anna, sitting beside her bed with a rehearsed expression of concern. This is just a formality, he said softly, pressing a pen into her frail hand. The doctors need these consents for your next phase of treatment. It's important, Anna. Her hands trembled as she signed, her vision blurred from medication and exhaustion. She didn't question him. How could she? He was her husband, her protector, or so she thought. With her signature, the deed to the house was his to sell. Crystal arranged everything swiftly. Within weeks, the paperwork was finalized. The historic house, the place where Anna had poured her heart into every corner, was sold to Thomas Walker. Robert pocketed the money, barely glancing back at the home he once shared with his wife. On the day the sale closed, Crystal kissed him triumphantly. See, she whispered against his lips. It wasn't so hard. She won't last long anyway. Forget her. Forget all of it. Robert forced a smile, though his conscience twisted. He drowned the unease in another drink, telling himself over and over that he deserved this. He deserved freedom, a new life, a chance to feel alive again. And so, with Anna still lying in the upstairs bedroom, clinging to the belief that her husband would return with hope and healing, Robert walked away. He handed the keys to Tom Walker and convinced himself that what he left behind was nothing more than a shadow of a life already gone. But deep inside, even as he boarded the plane with Crystal and their ill-gotten gains, a voice nodded him, a reminder that betrayal, no matter how neatly executed, always carried a price. The night after Anna had collapsed in her upstairs bedroom, Tom Walker couldn't shake the image of her pale face or the way her voice had cracked when she insisted the house was still hers. He had bought this property to start over, not to step into a mystery of betrayal and abandonment. Yet here he was, pacing the living room with his phone in hand, trying to make sense of the impossible situation. When the paramedics had left, stabilizing Anna but confirming she needed serious medical attention, Tom sat staring at the paperwork that bore Robert Mitchell's signature. He had bought this house legally. Every page was clean, notarized, airtight. But no one had mentioned a sick wife left behind upstairs. Frustration boiling over, he scrolled through the sale documents again until he found Robert's contact information. His hand tightened on the phone as he pressed the call button. It rang only once before a voice answered, smooth and detached. Robert Mitchell, the man said. Tom didn't bother with pleasantries. What the hell is going on? I moved into the house I bought from you, and your wife is still here. She's sick, barely able to stand. Did you think you could just forget to mention her? For a moment, silence. Then Robert chuckled, low and bitter. Ah, so you've met Anna. Met her? She nearly died in front of me. She thinks you're at work, that you're coming back for her. What kind of man leaves his wife behind like that? Robert's voice hardened. Consider her part of the deal. She won't live long anyway. You've got a house, and soon you'll have it free and clear. Do whatever you want with her in the meantime." Tom's jaw clenched. "Are you hearing yourself? She's your wife." "No," Robert said flatly. "She's a burden. I carried it long enough. Now she's yours." The line went dead before Tom could respond. He lowered the phone slowly, his stomach twisting at the sheer cruelty in those words. Consider her part of the deal, as if Anna were nothing more than discarded furniture left behind in the sale. For minutes, Tom stood frozen, staring into the shadows of the room, wrestling with a surge of disbelief and anger. He had been duped, manipulated into buying a house tied to a woman abandoned to die. Yet when he thought of Anna, the frail way she had tried to assert ownership of the home, the hope in her voice when she spoke of Robert returning, Tom's fury softened into something heavier: pity, compassion. The next morning, determined to untangle the truth, Tom drove Anna to the hospital. She resisted at first, still insisting Robert would handle everything, but her body was too weak to fight him, and eventually she let herself be guided into the sterile halls of Mission Hospital in Asheville. The doctors ran tests, spoke in hushed voices, then delivered the verdict. Anna needed surgery as soon as possible. Without it, her condition would deteriorate rapidly. With it, there was hope, but the cost was staggering. 6 figures at minimum. Hundreds of thousands of dollars Anna didn't have. Tom asked the obvious question: what about her husband? Hasn't he covered her treatment before? The doctor's expression was grim. Her insurance was dropped months ago. No payments have been made. We reached out to Robert Mitchell repeatedly. He never responded. Anna's eyes filled with tears when she heard. "No, that's not possible. He promised me. He promised he'd take care of it." She turned to Tom, clutching his hand with desperate strength. "He must be busy. He'll come back. He always said." Her voice broke. She couldn't finish. Tom swallowed hard, unsure what to say. The truth that Robert had written her off, that he had moved on with a mistress and a pocket full of cash from selling the very roof over her head, would crush her, and yet letting her cling to that hope felt crueler still. As he drove her back to the house later, Anna leaned against the car window, staring at the blur of trees and mountains beyond. She whispered Robert's name softly, as though repeating it would conjure him. Tom gripped the steering wheel, his chest tightening with frustration. He didn't know Anna anything. She was, in every legal sense, a stranger. The house was his. Her husband's betrayal was not his battle. And yet he couldn't escape the weight of it. He thought of her fragile body, the shallow breaths, the way she had collapsed in his arms. He thought of Robert's cold words. "She won't live long anyway." Back at the house, Tom helped her up the stairs, settling her into bed once more. He lingered in the doorway, torn between reason and conscience. He could walk away, keep his distance, and let her fate unfold. Or he could step into a fight that wasn't his, shouldering a burden he had never asked for. As Anna drifted into an uneasy sleep, Tom stood there, silent and unmoving, wrestling with the choice before him. Would he leave her to die in the shadows of betrayal? Or would he become the unlikely lifeline she had been denied? The question hung heavy in the room, unanswered but pressing, as the winter wind rattled against the windows of the house that now bound their lives together. For 2 nights, Tom lay awake in his new bedroom, the silence of the house broken only by Anna's faint coughs upstairs. Each time he heard her stir, he thought of Robert's words. Consider her part of the deal. The cruelty of it seared his conscience. He had tried to tell himself that none of this was his responsibility. He wasn't her husband. He hadn't made those vows. He was just a man who had bought a house. But each time he replayed the doctor's warning in his mind, that without surgery she wouldn't survive, he knew the truth. If he walked away, Anna would die. On the 3rd morning, Tom stood in the kitchen, staring at the folder of mortgage papers. His stomach twisted as he dialed his banker. "I need to refinance," he said, his voice low but steady. "Yes, immediately. I need the cash out." By the end of the week, the house he had only just bought was leveraged again. The money that was meant to secure his new future was instead being funneled into saving a stranger. When Tom arrived at Anna's bedside with the news, she looked at him in disbelief. "You can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "That's too much. Robert will come back. He promised." Tom shook his head gently, his eyes steady. "He isn't coming back, Anna. But you're not alone. Not anymore." She turned her face away, tears slipping silently down her cheek. The next day, Tom signed the hospital paperwork. He sat beside Anna as the nurses prepared her for surgery, squeezing her hand while fear clouded her eyes. "You'll get through this," he told her quietly. "You're stronger than you think." The hours crawled by as Tom paced the waiting room, his hands clenched into fists. Every time the door swung open, he searched the surgeon's face for an answer. Finally, Dr. Lee emerged, pulling off his gloves. "The procedure went well," he announced. Relief flooded Tom, so hard his knees nearly gave out. When Anna opened her eyes 2 days later, Tom was the first face she saw. She blinked at him, her lips dry and cracked. "Why?" she asked weakly. "Why would you do this for me?" He leaned closer, his voice soft but firm. "Because you deserve a chance to live." In the weeks that followed, Anna's strength began to return, though slowly. Each morning, Tom arrived at the hospital with coffee for himself and tea for her. He learned how she liked her eggs, how she preferred the blinds half open to let in the light, how music, soft classical, calmed her nerves. It was in those quiet routines that something shifted. One morning, when he walked in balancing a tray of breakfast, she smiled. An actual smile, faint but real. It stopped him in his tracks. He hadn't realized how much he had wanted to see it until that moment. "You didn't have to," she said softly, nodding at the scrambled eggs. "I wanted to," Tom replied simply. Days bled into weeks. Anna laughed for the first time when he clumsily spilled water across the floor, muttering curses as he scrambled to clean it up. She teased him gently, and the sound of her laughter was like sunlight cutting through years of storm clouds. Yet beneath the fragile happiness lingered shadows. At night, when Tom sat by her bed, he sometimes caught her whispering Robert's name. She still clung to pieces of the life she had lost, as if admitting it was gone would undo the little strength she had gained. One evening, as the last light of day painted the Blue Ridge Mountains outside her window, Anna spoke with a trembling voice. "I don't understand how he could just leave. We built a life together. I trusted him." Tom didn't know what to say. He couldn't erase the betrayal or explain away Robert's cruelty. Instead, he reached for her hand. "Sometimes people show us who they really are when life gets hard," he said quietly. "But that doesn't mean you don't deserve better." Anna squeezed his hand in return, her eyes glistening. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something, a flicker of trust, a fragile bond growing in the cracks of brokenness. By the time the doctors declared her well enough to leave the hospital, Anna no longer looked like the woman Tom had found collapsing in her upstairs bedroom. She was still thin, still recovering, but her cheeks carried color again, and her smile, rare though it was, hinted at resilience. As Tom wheeled her through the hospital doors and into the crisp Asheville air, she turned to him with quiet conviction. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Tom replied. "Just live." And in that moment, standing in the fading light of day, it was clear that their lives had intertwined in ways neither of them could have predicted. Tom had saved her body, but slowly, piece by piece, he was beginning to save her heart as well. When the doctors finally declared Anna strong enough to leave, Tom drove her home, not to the cold and empty house Robert had abandoned, but to the same place, now filled with something new. For the first time in months, Anna crossed the threshold without fear of being alone. Tom was there, steady and dependable, his quiet presence softening the silence of the rooms. Her recovery continued slowly, but Tom transformed the house into a sanctuary. The kitchen, once filled with the echo of Robert's complaints, now smelled of warm bread and roasted chicken. Each evening, Tom set the table, insisting she sit and rest while he prepared dinner. At first, Anna resisted, and used to such gentleness. But one night, as he placed a bowl of soup in front of her and sat across the table with a smile, she realized how long it had been since she had felt safe in her own home. Conversations blossomed over those meals. They talked about music, about childhood memories, about dreams they had never shared with anyone else. Tom confessed how he had always longed for a family but had never found the right person. Anna admitted how much she missed painting, how illness had stolen her inspiration. And in those long, unhurried talks, they began to stitch together the beginnings of something fragile but real. One evening, when autumn rain tapped against the windows, Tom turned on an old record player he had found in the attic. The soft hum of jazz filled the room. He extended his hand to her. "Dance with me." Anna laughed nervously, shaking her head. "I can't. I'll fall." "Then I'll catch you," he said simply. With hesitation, she let him guide her to her feet. His arm was steady around her waist, his steps patient. They moved slowly across the living room, her cheek brushing against his shoulder as the music wrapped around them. For a brief moment, Anna forgot her frailty, forgot the years of loneliness. She was just a woman, swaying in the arms of a man who saw her. Not her illness, not her past, but her. When the song ended, Tom didn't let go immediately. He looked down at her, his voice soft but unwavering. "Anna, I need to tell you something." Her heart thudded. "I didn't plan for this," he continued. "But somewhere between hospital visits and burnt toast and your smile when you finally laughed again, I fell in love with you." Anna's breath caught. A dozen emotions collided inside her. Gratitude, fear, longing, guilt. "Tom!" She stepped back slightly, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know if I can. My marriage, my vows, even after everything he did, part of me still feels chained to them." Tom's gaze didn't falter. "You don't owe him your life, Anna." He walked away. "But you," he reached for her hand. "You're still here, and you deserve more than waiting for someone who isn't coming back." Her resistance crumbled beneath the truth in his words. She had been fighting against the possibility of love, afraid it would betray her loyalty, afraid it would mean letting go of the past. But as she looked into Tom's eyes, she realized something she had long denied. Robert had already severed those vows when he sold the very ground beneath her feet. The next morning, Anna called her lawyer. The divorce papers had already been signed by Robert as part of the property sale. All that remained was her signature. With trembling hands, she placed her name on the line, the ink sealing not just the end of a marriage, but the end of her captivity. When she set down the pen, she exhaled deeply, as though releasing years of pain. Tom was waiting for her in the kitchen, 2 mugs of coffee steaming on the counter. She handed him the signed papers, her voice unsteady but sure. "It's over." He smiled gently, pulling her into his arms. "Then it's the beginning." From that day forward, their lives intertwined more openly. They shared routines, laughter, and the quiet comfort of companionship. Tom's presence turned every mundane moment, watering plants, folding laundry, sipping tea, into something tender. Weeks later, a letter arrived. Anna's mother was returning to the States after years abroad with her new husband. Anna's stomach knotted at the thought. The memory of her mother leaving her behind on her 18th birthday still stung. Yet when the day came, she stood on the porch beside Tom as a car pulled into the driveway. Her mother stepped out, older now, her once bright hair streaked with gray. She hesitated, then rushed forward, tears filling her eyes. "Anna," she whispered, pulling her into an embrace. "I never thought I'd see you like this. You're alive. You're happy." Anna held her tightly, the old hurt still present but softened by time. "I am," she said simply, glancing at Tom, who stood nearby, watching with quiet pride. Her mother looked between them, understanding dawning in her expression. "He's good for you," she said softly. "I can see it." For the first time in years, Anna felt a fragile but real sense of peace. She had been abandoned, betrayed, nearly destroyed. But standing there with Tom's arm around her and her mother's blessing in her ears, she realized that from the ashes of everything she had lost, something new, something beautiful had begun. Robert Mitchell had once been the picture of success: sharp suits, a growing logistics business, a reputation as a man who could command any room he entered. But when he boarded a plane with Crystal Hayes bound for Italy, it wasn't ambition that fueled him. It was escape. In Florence, they rented a lavish apartment with high ceilings and balconies that overlooked cobblestone streets. Robert marveled at the charm of a life that seemed so far removed from hospital corridors and medical bills. Crystal dragged him through boutiques, urging him to buy designer clothes, watches, jewelry. "You can afford it," she would purr, sliding her hand along his arm. "Why not enjoy yourself?" And for a while, Robert believed her. They dined in Michelin-starred restaurants, drank champagne that cost more than most people's rent, and attended parties filled with laughter and excess. He told himself he deserved this, that after years of carrying the weight of Anna's illness, he had earned freedom. But money, no matter how plentiful, disappears quickly when spent without thought. Within months, the funds from the house sale began to dwindle. Bills piled up and creditors called. Robert brushed them off at first, assuring himself more money would come. But it didn't. The business he had left behind in North Carolina faltered without his oversight. Contracts dissolved. Employees quit. Revenue dried up. Crystal noticed the shift long before Robert admitted it. She frowned when he hesitated over a bill, her green eyes narrowing. "You said you had money," she snapped one night, tossing her glass of wine onto the marble floor. "I didn't sign up for broke." Robert tried to placate her, promising that things would improve, that he just needed time to rebuild overseas. But Crystal had never been a woman who waited. Soon, there were whispered phone calls in the other room, messages she hid from him, evenings she didn't come home at all. The day she left, she didn't bother with excuses. Robert returned to their apartment to find her clothes gone, her perfume lingering faintly in the air. On the table was a note, written in her elegant scrawl. "I found someone who knows how to take care of me. Don't look for me." That someone, Robert soon learned, was an Italian businessman wealthy enough to provide Crystal with the life she craved. Alone in the apartment, Robert stared at the empty closets and felt the walls closing in. He tried calling her, but she didn't answer. He sent emails, begged for meetings, even stood outside the hotel where she now stayed. She walked past him without a glance, her arm hooked around another man's. It was then that reality crashed down. He wasn't the powerful businessman anymore. He wasn't the man with money, with status, with a beautiful wife waiting at home. He was nothing. His drinking worsened. Days blurred into nights as he sat in dim bars, nursing cheap whiskey and muttering to himself about how unfair life had been. Locals stopped talking to him, dismissing him as another washed-up foreigner who had squandered his fortune. In the quiet hours, when the alcohol wasn't enough to numb him, Robert's thoughts turned back to Anna. He remembered her soft voice, the way she had once looked at him with trust so pure it had shamed him. He remembered the vows he had made, the promises to protect her, to stand by her in sickness and in health. He remembered, too, the moment he had betrayed all of it, pressing a pen into her trembling hand and tricking her into signing away the roof over her head. The guilt clawed at him, relentless. He began to see her face everywhere, in the reflection of shop windows, in the shadows of his apartment, even in his dreams. She appeared pale, frail, her eyes full of hurt, asking him why he had abandoned her. Robert would wake, gasping, drenched in sweat, reaching for a bottle to silence the voices in his head. But no amount of liquor could erase the truth. He had traded a lifetime of love and loyalty for a fleeting fantasy, and in doing so, he had destroyed himself. Months slipped by. His savings vanished entirely. The apartment was gone, repossessed by the landlord. He drifted between cheap hostels and park benches, the suit that once marked him as a man of wealth, now frayed and dirty. People who had once shaken his hand with respect crossed the street to avoid him. At night, he would sit under the Italian sky, listening to the distant laughter of others, and wonder how it had come to this. He thought of Anna, perhaps still waiting for him, perhaps already gone. He thought of the life they had built, the life he had thrown away. And with each passing day, the realization grew heavier. Even if he returned, even if he begged, it was far too late. Robert Mitchell, once the man who had everything, was now nothing more than a ghost of his own making, haunted, hollow, and utterly alone. Winter settled heavily over Asheville, the Blue Ridge Mountains dusted with snow that shimmered beneath the pale glow of street lamps. Inside the Walker home, warmth radiated from the fireplace, and laughter carried through the rooms, sounds that had not been heard there for far too long. It was New Year's Eve. Tom had gone to great lengths to prepare the evening, not only for Anna, but also for the two guests arriving from far away, her mother and her mother's new husband. Anna had been anxious at first, unsure what it would mean to face her mother again after years of absence. But as the evening unfolded, she found the courage to let the past rest, at least for one night. When her mother stepped through the door, bundled in a wool coat, eyes glistening with emotion, Anna felt an unexpected wave of relief. The embrace between them was tentative at first, but as her mother whispered, "I'm so proud of you," the years of distance melted just enough to make room for something new. They gathered around the dinner table, where Tom had prepared a feast: roast chicken, fresh bread, and vegetables bought from the local market that morning. The house glowed with candlelight, the scent of rosemary and garlic filling the air. For Anna, it was a scene she had once believed she would never experience again: family, warmth, belonging. Her mother's husband shared stories of their travels, while Tom poured glasses of wine and kept the conversation flowing with ease. Anna sat quietly at moments, soaking it all in, marveling at how drastically her life had changed. Not so long ago, she had been lying in a hospital bed, wondering if she had the strength to see another day. Now she was surrounded by love. Later, when the plates were cleared and music began to play softly in the background, Tom guided Anna toward the living room. He reached into his pocket, his hand trembling slightly. Anna caught her breath as he lowered himself onto one knee, his eyes locked on hers. "Anna," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion, "I didn't expect any of this when I bought this house. I thought I was just starting a new chapter on my own. But then you came into my life and everything changed. You showed me resilience, grace, and a strength I can only admire. I love you more than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me?" Anna's hand flew to her mouth, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the man who had carried her through her darkest moments, who had given her back not only her health, but her hope. She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, Tom." The room erupted in joy. Her mother clapped her hands together, overcome with emotion, while her husband raised his glass in a toast. Tom slid the ring onto Anna's finger, and as she gazed at it, her tears turned to laughter. For the first time in years, her future looked bright. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Robert Mitchell sat alone in a dingy room, a bottle half empty beside him. The echoes of laughter and love that filled Anna's new life were a distant memory to him, drowned by regret and bitterness. Crystal was gone, his fortune was gone, and all that remained were the ghosts of the choices he had made. He thought of Anna often, not with love, but with torment, knowing she had found happiness without him, knowing he had destroyed the only good thing he ever had. The contrast could not have been starker. Where Robert was consumed by solitude, Anna was embraced by family. Where he faced the cold emptiness of his betrayal, she stood on the threshold of a new beginning. As the clock neared midnight, Tom and Anna stepped outside onto the porch. The town below was alive with anticipation, people gathering in squares, children bundled in coats, neighbors greeting one another with cheer. The first bursts of fireworks lit the sky, colors exploding across the dark canvas above the mountains. Anna leaned into Tom, her head resting against his shoulder. The glow of the fireworks reflected in her eyes as she whispered, "I never thought I'd make it here. Not like this." Tom wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "You're here because you fought for it, Anna, and because you deserve every bit of this happiness." For a long moment, they stood in silence, watching the sky ignite with color. The pain of the past hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined her. Robert's betrayal had nearly destroyed her, but it had also cleared the path for something greater, for love that was genuine, for a life built on trust and kindness. Inside, her mother watched them from the window, tears slipping down her cheeks. She turned to her husband and whispered, "She finally found her place." And in that moment, as laughter drifted into the cold night air and the fireworks painted the heavens, Anna Mitchell knew the truth. Sometimes betrayal was the end of one life, but it was also the beginning of another, a better one. The final spark of light faded from the sky, and Anna closed her eyes, letting the warmth of Tom's embrace steady her. The house that had once been the scene of her despair now stood as a symbol of renewal. The journey had been painful, but it had led her here, home.